The year is 2015. NFL fans still hadn't gotten over the Malcolm Butler goal line interception that ripped the Lombardi Trophy out of Seattle's hands. And now, the Seahawks' morale was damaged for good. Marshawn Lynch's trust was broken, Cam Chancellor was holding out, and Richard Sherman questioned Russell Wilson's leadership. The aftermath of the choice to throw lingered. Meanwhile, the Patriots spent the entire offseason as the center of a national scandal. Tom Brady was suspended 4 games for Deflategate, then reinstated in federal court, turning the NFL's golden boy into a defiant outlaw. Brady and Belichick were armed with plenty of bulletin board material. But Brady's longtime rival Peyton Manning was 39, coming off a season where his arm gave out down the stretch, and his team fizzled out in January. The Broncos hired Gary Kubiak to install a new run-first zone-blocking scheme, the complete opposite of Manning's shotgun system. Some wondered if he could even play under center anymore, and there was a sense that the end was near. Denver's defense looked ready to carry the load, but the question remained, could the Sheriff lead one last ride? In Indianapolis, the heir to Manning's throne, Andrew Luck, was entering his 4th season and being anointed the next Brady or Rodgers. The Colts had just reached the AFC Championship and added Andre Johnson and Frank Gore to make a Super Bowl push. They were loaded, at least on paper. In the NFC, many teams had unfinished business. The Packers were still haunted by their meltdown loss to Seattle in the NFC title game. Aaron Rodgers was at the height of his powers, but a preseason torn ACL for Jordy Nelson wiped out his favorite target for the season. And in New York, Odell Beckham Jr. was entering his first full year as the NFL's biggest celebrity. After a historic rookie season headlined by that catch, he'd become the new face of the Giants' offense and the most electric receiver in football. The Cowboys, fresh off a 12-win season, lost DeMarco Murray to the Eagles, but Dallas bet that its offensive line and Tony Romo's arm could continue winning without the league's leading rusher. As for the Eagles, head coach Chip Kelly had seized full control of personnel, gutting the roster to bring in his guys. Out went LaShawn McCoy and Nick Foles, in came Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray. Kelly was either a visionary or an idiot. Things weren't exactly hunky-dory in the nation's capital either. Robert Griffin III was fighting for his job after years of injuries and tension with coaches. Prior to Week 1, Griffin was officially benched for Kirk Cousins, signaling the end of the RG3 era after 3 years. At the same time, San Francisco lost their identity. Within a single offseason, Jim Harbaugh was gone after feuding with the front office. Patrick Willis and Justin Smith both retired, Aldon Smith was released after yet another arrest, and Colin Kaepernick had significantly regressed after looking like a future MVP after his crazy 2012. A team that was one play from a Super Bowl win 3 years earlier was unrecognizable. Adrian Peterson returned after missing nearly all of 2014 due to suspension. Paired with second-year quarterback Teddy Bridgewater and a rising Mike Zimmer defense, the Vikings were a fashionable dark horse pick. It wasn't clear whether Peterson would regain his old form, but history had taught us not to doubt him. And the rookie class promised change. The first 2 picks in the draft, Florida State's Jameis Winston and Oregon's Marcus Mariota, both Heisman winners and instant starters for Tampa Bay and Tennessee. Winston was a pure gunslinger, Mariota the next exciting dual threat. The 2015 offseason also marked the arrival of the NFL's first true free agent megadeal era. Ndamukong Suh signed a $114 million contract with the Miami Dolphins, becoming the highest paid defensive player in history. And hidden by all of this, few teams were strapped with more mediocre expectations than the Carolina Panthers. They'd gone 7-8-1 the year before, and then lost their top wideout Kelvin Benjamin to a torn ACL in training camp. Cam Newton had just signed a massive contract and entered September with laser focus. And lately, I've been trying to stay more intentional with my focus. Between writing, researching, and editing, a lot of times by the middle of the day, my brain is pretty tired. And that's why I actually started taking MH1 daily. It's a premium brain and focus formula I take every morning. Just 2 capsules a day and no jitters like coffee or energy drinks. The design is clean, the packaging feels premium, and I like that it's stimulant-free so I can be focused without feeling wired. Plus, other people seem to be getting great results with it as well. What I've noticed is I feel a lot more locked in without feeling scattered, especially during long work sessions. It's subtle, but that's what I like about it. It fits seamlessly into my routine. If you want to try it yourself, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen right now to get 25% off your first order and free shipping on your first month for U.S. customers. Thanks again to MH1. Opening night in Foxborough was seen as somewhat of a Deflategate revenge game, and Tom Brady certainly got his, throwing 4 touchdowns, 3 of them to Gronkowski, shredding the Steelers' defense in a 28-21 win that taunted the league office in the process. The supposed villains embraced the role completely, beating the Bills, then hanging 51 on the Jags to head into their bye week 3-0. Also in week 1, the top 2 picks faced off, and made first impressions in opposite ways. In retrospect, it's perfect that Jameis Winston's first NFL pass was a pick 6, while Marcus Mariota was literally perfect. 4 first-half touchdowns, 158.3 passer rating, and a 42-14 flattening of the Bucs. As for Denver, Peyton was a shell of the quarterback we knew. The Broncos had trouble moving the ball, but the defense was a different story. In week 2 against the Chiefs, Manning was outplayed all night by Alex Smith, but in the final seconds, linebacker Brandon Marshall forced a Jamal Charles fumble, and Bradley Roby scooped it up for a walk-off win. Denver's defense led them to a 3-0 start. But the Cowboys' promising 2014 carryover disintegrated in weeks. Des Bryant broke his foot in week 1. Tony Romo broke his collarbone in week 2. A cruel beginning for a team that had been so close to an NFC Championship berth 8 months earlier. And in Seattle, the Super Bowl hangover hit hard. The Seahawks started the year 0-2, losing in overtime to the Rams in week 1 and falling to Green Bay in week 2. When Chancellor finally returned in week 3, Seattle beat Chicago 26-0, but skepticism was still warranted. Meanwhile, the Packers were taking full advantage. Even without Jordy Nelson, Aaron Rodgers was on another planet. He threw 10 touchdowns to 0 interceptions in the first 3 weeks. His chemistry with Randall Cobb and James Jones made Nelson's injury almost irrelevant. 1,000 miles east, Chip Kelly's Philadelphia experiment was already combusting. DeMarco Murray averaged 1/2 of a yard per carry through September, and the team started 0-2. They narrowly escaped the Jets in week 3 to get to 1-2, but the air of genius around Kelly was a thing of the past. Elsewhere in the NFC, under first-year head coach Dan Quinn, the Falcons were flying high in Kyle Shanahan's new offense. Everyone knew what Matt Ryan and Julio Jones were, but Devonta Freeman emerged out of nowhere to become one of the league's premier backs. A thrilling Monday night comeback win over the Eagles in week 1 and a shootout victory over Dallas in week 3 made them 3-0. In the same division, the Carolina Panthers were quickly shattering expectations. After losing Kelvin Benjamin, they had no talent at wide receiver, but Cam Newton willed his team to a 3-0 start. Greg Olsen was his only reliable target, yet every week Newton made something out of nothing. Plus, the defense was elite, with Josh Norman breaking out as the league's top shutdown corner to go along with Kuechly and Thomas Davis. The thought to be boring Panthers were the most physical team in the NFC. Not everyone could go undefeated in September, however. The Bills destroyed the Colts in week 1 under new head coach Rex Ryan, but fell to New England in week 2 before bouncing back against Miami in week 3. The 49ers embarrassed Minnesota in their opener 20-3, only to lose their next 4 games, showing that week 1 was a mirage. By October, the Patriots were going scorched earth on the rest of the league. Tom Brady humiliated Dallas, Indy, New York, and Miami, tossing 11 touchdowns in October and scoring 30 points in every game. But the Jets did look good. Ryan Fitzpatrick and Brandon Marshall had New York sitting at 4-3. In Denver, though, Peyton Manning threw 2 touchdowns to 7 picks in October. However, on defense, Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware came off the edge to constantly get pressure, and the secondary, featuring Aqib Talib, Chris Harris, and TJ Ward, became known as the no-fly zone. In week 6, Manning threw 3 interceptions against the Browns and still won. As insane as this is to say, Denver was 6-0 with arguably the worst quarterback in the NFL. But Aaron Rodgers was arguably the best, and the Packers were also perfect, until week number 8, when the Broncos invited Rodgers into Mile High and held him to a career-low 77 yards passing in a 29-10 beatdown. In week 6, Carolina traveled to Seattle and dug themselves into a 23-14 hole in the fourth quarter. But Cam led a comeback capped by a game-winning pass to Greg Olsen with 30 seconds left. silencing the crowd that cheered as his season ended in Seattle the previous January. The Panthers were 7-0 after Week 8, and Cam was yet to even heat up. Cincinnati was living out a similar story. For a few years, the Bengals had been good, not great, but this team looked different. Andy Dalton was playing like an MVP, throwing to A.J. Green and Tyler Eifert, with a defense that would also end up flaunting 5 Pro Bowlers. Their highlight of the season's first half was also against Seattle in Week 5. Down 24-7 in the fourth quarter, Dalton led a comeback for the ages, tying it on the final play of regulation before winning in overtime. They would start 8-0, giving the AFC a new heavyweight. But after Seattle blew those leads to Carolina and Cincy, they fell to 2-4 despite a game-saving forced fumble by Cam Chancellor on Calvin Johnson back in Week 4. Chancellor's return was a boost, but Russell Wilson had already been sacked 31 times. They were seen more as prey than predators, just like the Colts, who had also not lived up to their billing as Super Bowl hopefuls. Week 6 against the Pats was their rock bottom, with the infamous fake punt disaster, possibly the worst play of all time summing up their season. Andrew Luck was nursing an injured shoulder, and the defense was bottom of the barrel. The Steelers were also just trying to hang on. Big Ben was hurt, forcing Michael Vick to start. Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown kept them alive, though. Bell's walk-off touchdown on Monday night against San Diego held them over until Roethlisberger's Week 8 return. And while the league's powerhouses scrambled, rookie running back Todd Gurley burst onto the scene in St. Louis, averaging 142 yards rushing in his first 4 starts. His violent, upright style drew Adrian Peterson comparisons. Even the Raiders were watchable again, with Derek Carr and Amari Cooper building a meaningful connection. And in New Orleans, the Saints and Giants combined for the wildest game of the season, a 52-49 shootout where Drew Brees threw 7 touchdowns and Odell Beckham answered with 3 of his own. A reminder of what Eli and Brees were still capable of. Entering Week 9, 4 undefeated teams still remained: the Patriots, Bengals, Broncos, and Panthers. But perfection never lasts long in the NFL. And the Packers had just taken their first loss, but what appeared to be merely a blip turned into much more. They lost to Carolina the next week after falling behind 27-7. Mike McCarthy's predictable play calling made the offense questionable. Next week, and worst of all, an 18-16 home loss to Detroit, their first at Lambeau against the Lions since 1991. Unlike them, the Panthers were fully in sync. In Week 11, Newton threw 5 touchdowns against Washington in a 44-16 rout. They began 11-0. And the Patriots were up to 10-0 despite Julian Edelman's broken foot and Dion Lewis's torn ACL. But on a Sunday night at Mile High against Brock Osweiler, not Peyton Manning, the Pats led 21-7. However, the Broncos came back and then forced overtime. And in overtime, CJ Anderson broke free for a 48-yard touchdown, ending the Patriots' perfect season. And just weeks earlier, Denver took their first loss to the Colts. Then came the lowest point of Peyton Manning's career. Against Kansas City, he'd broken the all-time passing yardage record, but threw 4 interceptions in the same game, getting benched for Osweiler. But they didn't skip a beat. The Broncos beat the Bears on the road, then the Pats, happily winning ugly. But even though the Colts took down Denver, they left November in shambles. Andrew Luck suffered a torn abdomen and lacerated kidney, ending his season. At 40 years old, Matt Hasselbeck stepped in and actually won 2 in a row. The Texans got back to 500 thanks to J.J. Watt, but the division was a war of attrition. Up north, Cincinnati's dream run hit a wall. They entered November undefeated but fell in primetime to Houston 10-6, one of the grossest Monday Night Football games of the decade, then lost 34-31 to Arizona the following week, and the bottom fell out from under the Saints. Their defense gave up 130 points in 3 weeks, and defensive coordinator Rob Ryan was fired. In Week 9, Antonio Brown put on a clinic. Against Oakland, he exploded for 17 catches and 284 yards. He didn't find the end zone, but he was the Steelers' offense, single-handedly carrying them to a 38-35 win. Arguably the defining game of his prime, proof he was the best receiver in the game. In Minnesota, the Vikings had gone from rebuilding to contending. Adrian Peterson was once again leading the league in rushing, looking like the same old force of nature. Teddy Bridgewater was a solid game manager, but the defense, led by Harrison Smith and Everson Griffin, had the kind of edge Mike Zimmer built his reputation on. When Green Bay stumbled, Minnesota overtook them for the NFC North lead. And Seattle finally found its rhythm. After their bye, Russell Wilson began to cook. Doug Baldwin ascended into stardom, while rookie Thomas Rawls filled in for an injured Marshawn Lynch and ran for 209 yards against the 49ers. Their performance against Pittsburgh in Week 12 was a big-time statement. Wilson threw 5 touchdowns, and they picked off Roethlisberger twice in a 39-30 win. Thanksgiving was also great. The Bears stunned Green Bay at Lambeau Field on Brett Favre's jersey retirement night, furthering the Packers' spiral. The Lions annihilated the Eagles behind 5 Matthew Stafford touchdowns, 3 of which went to Calvin Johnson. And in Dallas, the Panthers ended Tony Romo's comeback before it even began. Romo, fresh off returning from injury, threw 2 pick-sixes and broke his collarbone again. The Carolina Panthers were the center of the 2015 story, 11-0 with the most polarizing quarterback in the league, who kicked the month off by throwing 5 touchdowns against the Saints. 2 weeks later, he won a shootout against the Giants, throwing another 5 touchdowns, and practically locking up the MVP. The Panthers were blowing teams out, making it look easy, until Week 16 at Atlanta, highlighted by a 70-yard Julio Jones touchdown that ended Carolina's dream of perfection. Still, the Panthers finished 15-1, taking the NFC's top seed, and Cam ended with 45 total touchdowns, one of the greatest MVP seasons ever. But after losing to Denver, the Patriots suffered a baffling home loss to Philadelphia, where the Eagles scored on a punt return, blocked punt, and a pick-6. To make matters worse, a Week 17 loss to the Dolphins cost them home field advantage. The Patriots finished a concerning 12-4. As for the Broncos quarterback carousel, Brock Osweiler had taken over mid-season while Peyton Manning rehabbed his ailing foot. But in Week 17, with Denver trailing San Diego, Gary Kubiak benched Osweiler after he was intercepted twice and fumbled, turning back to Manning. Peyton came in and guided the Broncos to a comeback win that secured the AFC's #1 seed. In the desert, the Arizona Cardinals were an absolute machine, and rookie running back David Johnson emerged as a superstar, erupting for 229 total yards and 3 touchdowns against Philly in Week 15, as Arizona clinched the NFC West. But the heartbeat of their defense, Tyrann Mathieu, tore his ACL in the same game. Still, the Cardinals finished 13-3, the best record in franchise history since 1948, and Palmer was the MVP runner-up. But Russell Wilson was on another level, throwing 24 touchdowns to just 1 interception over his final 7 games. Doug Baldwin turned into Jerry Rice for a month, catching 2 touchdowns seemingly every Sunday. They scored 30 points in 5 of their last 6 games, finishing 10-6 and ready to spoil someone's season. Which brings me to Minnesota. Adrian Peterson took home another rushing title, and in Week 17 they walked into Lambeau and beat the Packers to win their first NFC North crown since 2009. The Packers, though, crawled into the postseason after losing 4 of 6, including a 38-8 embarrassment in Arizona. But even in a frustrating year, Rodgers still produced one of the most unforgettable moments of his career. In Week 13 against Detroit, with time expired and Green Bay trailing 23-21, Rodgers threw his patented Hail Mary 61 yards, a throw that practically scraped the Ford Field rafters, and tight end Richard Rodgers came down with it in the end zone for the win. And Andy Reid's team completed one of the most improbable turnarounds ever. After starting 1-5 and losing Jamal Charles to a torn ACL, the Chiefs rattled off 10 straight wins. They entered the playoffs at 11-5, with Jeremy Maclin and Travis Kelce as their leading receivers. The Jets, on the other hand, could not finish. After 5 straight wins, all they needed was 1 more in Buffalo. But Ryan Fitzpatrick threw 3 picks, and Rex Ryan got his revenge as New York missed the playoffs at 10-6. In the AFC South, the Texans won by default. DeAndre Hopkins was unstoppable. J.J. Watt won his 3rd Defensive Player of the Year in 4 seasons. And their defense carried them to a 9-7 division title despite starting 4 different quarterbacks. But the most impressive defensive game of the year came from Khalil Mack, who notched 5 sacks in 1 half during Week 14 against Denver. And in the NFC East, the Cowboys were done, the Eagles went 7-9, and the Giants' defense wasted Pro Bowl seasons from Eli and OBJ. Though we did get one epic Josh Norman-OBJ rivalry game. So it was Kirk Cousins who led Washington to a division title. Way back in October, he led a comeback against Tampa in the "You Like That" game. In December, he threw 11 touchdowns to just 1 pick. The Redskins returned to the playoffs at 9-7. The 2015 postseason opened with total domination in Houston. On the very first play, Knile Davis took the kickoff 106 yards to the house, and the Chiefs never looked back. Brian Hoyer delivered a horrendous performance for Houston, 4 interceptions, 2 fumbles, 0 points. Kansas City snapped a 22-year playoff win drought with a 30-0 shutout. That was followed by a totally forgettable game between the Steelers and Bengals in a cold Cincinnati downpour. The Bengals, chasing their first playoff win since 1990, had it sealed until Jeremy Hill fumbled with a minute and a half left. A hurt Big Ben returned, drove downfield, and 2 catastrophic penalties, one by Vontaze Burfict, one by Pac-Man Jones, set up Chris Boswell's game-winning field goal. In Minnesota, the Vikings led 9-0 in sub-zero temperatures when Russell Wilson turned a botched snap into a miracle completion that flipped the momentum of the game. Still, Vikings kicker Blair Walsh found himself lined up for a game-winning 27-yard chip shot at the end, but pulled it wide left, Seahawks 10, Vikings 9. And in Washington, Aaron Rodgers came back to life. After a sluggish first quarter, he threw 2 touchdowns, and the Packers came back to beat the Redskins 35-18. In Foxborough, Tom Brady and the Patriots faced Kansas City's 11-game win streak. The Chiefs' defense had bullied everyone since October, but Brady had no issues. 302 yards, 2 touchdowns, the second of which went to Gronk to all but seal it. New England advanced to their 5th straight AFC title game. In Arizona, the Packers and Cardinals produced the most chaotic finish imaginable. Down 20-13, Aaron Rodgers completed back-to-back unbelievable throws. First, a 60-yarder to Jeff Janis on 4th and 20. Then, a Hail Mary to Janis again as time expired to tie the game. But in overtime, Larry Fitzgerald ripped the game from Green Bay's hands. On the first play, he took a pass 75 yards, then scored the game winner moments later in an instant classic. On Sunday in Denver, Big Ben was playing through injury and Denver's offense was still sputtering. But in the fourth quarter, a Pittsburgh fumble flipped the game, and C.J. Anderson's touchdown run gave Denver the lead. The defense shut it down to advance. And after a week off, the Panthers reminded the world why they were 15-1. Cam Newton and Luke Kuechly led a 31-0 first-half demolition of Seattle, highlighted by his pick 6. The Seahawks showed fight, but fell 31-24. The AFC Championship in Denver was the 17th and final duel between Manning and Brady. And from the start, Denver's defense neutralized the Pats' offense. Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware hit Brady 11 times, and he was intercepted twice. Manning wasn't much better, but he made the few plays that mattered, including a 12-yard pass to Owen Daniels to make it 14-6. Late in the fourth quarter, Brady drove 50 yards to set up a touchdown to make it 20-18. All they needed was a 2-point conversion to tie, but Brady's pass to Edelman was tipped and picked. Manning had beaten his greatest rival one last time, sending the Broncos to Super Bowl 50. In the NFC, Carolina ended the suspense early. Facing Arizona, the top 2 seeds met for what was one of the most anticipated games of the year. Cam Newton piled up 382 total yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 front flip into the end zone that became one of the signature plays of his season. In contrast, old man Carson Palmer melted under pressure, throwing 4 interceptions as the Panthers forced 7 total turnovers. Carolina won 49-15. It was difficult to imagine this version of Peyton Manning beating this version of Cam Newton. In the eyes of many, Super Bowl 50 wasn't going to be close. Carolina steamrolled the NFC, while Denver had grinded through the season with an aging quarterback and an offense that was a liability. But it wasn't going to matter if their defense was just going to wreck the game. On the Panthers' second drive, Von Miller got a strip sack, and Malik Jackson fell on the ball in the end zone for a touchdown. That set the tone for the night. Cam tried everything, but Denver hit him 13 times and forced him into mistakes he hadn't made all year. As for Peyton, he composed himself in the playoffs and was a solid game manager throughout. He didn't throw a touchdown, but 2 field goals, a C.J. Anderson rushing score, and that infamous forced fumble from Von Miller sealed it 24-10. For Peyton Manning, it was the storybook ending. Not exactly the way he would have drawn it up, but at 39 years old, benched mid-season, and legitimately one of the 2 worst quarterbacks in the league during the regular season, he rode off as a 2-time Super Bowl champ and 5-time MVP after 18 years. Von Miller was named Super Bowl MVP, his performance immortalized as one of the greatest defensive showcases ever, finishing with 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and completely sapping the MVP of his powers. As for Cam Newton, the defeat cut deep. He'd carried an undermanned offense to the brink of history, only for that one decision not to dive for the fumble to overshadow his entire year. This season was great, but was 2012 even better?